Welcome to the CultureLab. I'm your host, Aga Bayer. This podcast helps you turn your company culture into rocket fuel for meaningful growth. It explores how we can make the word work synonymous with fun, meaning, and belonging. It looks at how we can build remarkable cultures that scale as our businesses grow and the world keeps on changing.
We don't want it to descend into, we all have to sit around and talk about our feelings all the time, because actually it's not about that. I'm still deliberately putting my questions in a specific part of what you said. I am in control. I am in charge of my half of our conversation, but I'm not trying to influence the data that you come back with. And I think that's what makes something clean. I'm genuinely interested in the richness of your data, and then I can share mine into a rich space.
Hello friends, and welcome to episode 102 of the CultureLab podcast. This episode is brought to you by CultureBrained, a one-of-a-kind global community for leaders and culture champions who want to learn new ways of cultivating remarkable cultures at scale in this brave new world of remote and hybrid work. The CultureBrained community is where we come together to answer some pretty darn hard, ungoogleable questions about culture. And our members get to participate in things like weekly huddles, masterclasses, flash mastermind groups, and talks from world-class experts on culture. And you know many of these experts from this podcast. But most importantly, we facilitate deep peer-to-peer connections. Because making work synonymous with fun, meaning, and belonging, it's definitely not a task for a single person. It requires tapping into the collective wisdom of bold, kind, and curious culture leaders who are on a mission to redefine and, frankly, decrapify work. So, if this sounds like something you'd like to be a part of, check it out at tiny.1/CultureBrained. And don't worry, you don't have to write it down. There is a link in the show notes. I don't think that anyone would argue that people are different. And while our individuality and the resulting diversity might make life interesting and exciting, they can also get in the way of effective communication, especially in the workplace. If you are noticing that workplace drama is a major leak in your system, if it's draining your people's energy and creativity, I think it might be worth to reflect where these differences even come from. Because it's certainly not from our DNA. Considering our entire DNA sequence, each human is about 99.8% identical to any other human on this planet. So what are the factors that make us so incredibly different? Well, my guest today, Caitlin Walker, refers to one of these factors as our internal culture, the combination of deeply seated motives, values, beliefs, and assumptions that drive our behavior. And when we interact with others, everything that we perceive, everything that we feel and think and do is basically filtered through our internal culture. So how do we move from what we often consider to be irreconcilable differences to our common humanity, to that 99.8%? How do we bridge the gap between our internal cultures so that we can work better together? Well, these questions have been at the center of Caitlin's work when she came across David Grove's approach called clean language. And Caitlin took his approach and developed a group and organizational application known as systemic modeling that basically helps teams to work better together. A little bit more about Caitlin. She won her PhD for her thesis on using clean language and has 25 years of experience working with diverse teams and helping them communicate better together. And in this show, we are going to talk about the applications of her methodology at work And we even do a couple of demos where she basically leads me through a series of clean questions. So it was quite fun to be a part of this. And I really hope that you enjoy this show as much as I did. So, with no further ado, here is Caitlin Walker.
So my name's Caitlin Walker, and I guess in a nutshell, what I love to do is to create cultures where people feel safe and motivated to take responsibility for getting what they want, and that they have all the skills to have the conversations they need to make their needs known and to take into account what other people need at the same time.
I am so excited about this conversation and welcome to the CultureLab. We met when you ran a workshop in the CultureBrained community about drama, and it felt like a really important topic to focus on at the time because drama leads to vast emotional waste in the workplace. So I'm really keen to unpack this topic with you here today. But before we go there, there's one question that I ask all our guests, and it's, what were the early cultural influences that shaped you as a person? Talk to me a little bit about that first.
It's interesting. The simple thing is that we moved around a lot when I was little. So my mom's American, my dad's British. I was born in Nigeria. They were teacher trainers. And so some of the very early influences are these rules apply in this culture, but they don't apply in this culture. And here we have to behave like this. As an outsider, you think, why are you doing that? That's not going to get you what you want. That's making you miserable. By the time I was 9 or 10, I knew that people make things up, that culture isn't real. And I think for lots of people who move around, we do know something that other people don't always know, which is you just made that up. If what you're doing isn't working, get a different culture and get some different rules. Yeah, that's the earliest.
Oh my gosh, and what an interesting and powerful insight to have at such an early age. I think for many of us, we don't have that realization until we are 30 or even into our 40s, that culture is made up and that it's actually not, these are not rules, but agreements, social agreements. So given the fact that you had such a powerful insight at such an early age, how did that shape your life from that moment on?
At first, I might have had the insight, but I don't think I settled into it. So I spent a long time trying to work out the rules of whatever group or culture I was in and trying to fit in. And then the other thing that went was I'd think, hang on a minute, that's inconsistent. You say this, but you behave like that. My English grandmother was a member of the church. And I'd go, hang on a minute, you say we should behave like this, but actually, when you talk about these people or this group or that, you behave like this. So the other thing that happened as a result of that, the way it shaped me, was I started to call out inconsistency and say, if this rule is so good, how come we don't use it now? How come we should treat everybody with love and kindness except for all of this lot here? So that was the next shaping, was the inconsistency. And I think it took me a little while when I was working in groups, when I started to do real work. I was thinking, if I'm going to work with teenagers, for example, which is how I started, if anybody spoke to me the way I hear people talk to these teenagers, I wouldn't respond. So how about I talk to them the way I would like to be talked to? Everything grew from there. Originally, my work was with teenagers who didn't go to school. Then it was with the long-term unemployed. And then people started to say, this work that you've been winning awards for, can you do it in business? And I was like, well, yes, but I brought these rules. If this is so good, if you're teaching them to do it, do you do it? If you want me to come in and teach diversity and inclusion, as a board, do you practice diversity and inclusion? Is it consistent? Is it congruent?
Yeah.
So that was the next level of influence.
I'm curious, what was the way you wanted for people to engage with you that you put into practice with those teenagers at the early days, and then within businesses? How were you communicating differently when you embrace that different way of communication?
I think the heart of it is probably also in the drama-free conversations that we've had. The first is, if you're behaving in a certain way and it doesn't make sense to me, the chances are you're operating out of an internal culture that isn't the same as mine. So first of all, I don't need to be annoyed or frustrated or hurt because you don't behave the way I would behave. You look different to me. Therefore, your insides are probably going to be different to me as well. So that was the first thing. And so if you think about that idea that if you do something that's not what I would do, it will make sense at some level to your system as your internal culture. When I was working with the teenagers, some of them were very violent. Most of them were very violent. But if I went into that conversation thinking, it is my job to fix you, you should not be violent, then I'm already going in there with contempt for them and their system. Whereas if I believe that their violence will make complete sense at some level in their system, then my way of approaching it with the clean language that I had been taking from the work of David Grove was, I will just model, I will help you, we're working in teams, each find a model for how does your violence make sense? How does it work? So I just say, when you're losing temper, you are like what? And some of them would say, I snap. Oh, what kind of snap? Oh, it's really quick. Oh, okay, so he snaps really quick. Who's different to that? Oh, me, I'm like a kettle. I boil slow, 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 and then I explode. But maybe I don't even explode to the person who made me boil up. Sometimes I explode on the wrong person. By modeling them, they updated their own culture rather than me trying to change them by imposing my rules on them. If you think about that as an approach, it's a strange approach for a change maker to have.
Yes.
It's that I will not change you.
Yeah. It's also very much aligned with something that I deeply believe in, which is if we really want to change something or someone, we first need to be ready to change ourselves. And so it's basically entering into a conversation or into a situation with this openness and curiosity. And as you say, leaving contempt behind. And that's usually what happens, especially when you have drama in the workplace. People will be shaming and blaming and saying this is his fault or her fault. And instead, basically what you're saying is you are entering this conversation with genuine curiosity about the other person's internal culture, as you call it. And you talked about David Grove and the 4 questions of clean language. And I was wondering whether it would be useful for our listeners, first maybe to understand what is, for those folks who are not familiar with clean language, what is clean language? What are clean questions? And why is it so important if we really want to understand other people's internal culture and resolve situations that otherwise would be very, very difficult to resolve?
So the first thing is that when we ask questions, even when we are genuinely curious, we tend to ask questions based on what we've made up about what you've said so far. So, for example, if you were to say, I'm really stuck, and I'd say, oh, how can I help you? Even that question assumes that you are going to want my help.
Totally.
We had a little tiny one earlier with a team I was talking to earlier today. They're developing their own homegrown feedback model. And one of them said to the other, oh, it sounds to me that what's important to you is that feedback should be encouraging. And the person she was talking to said, well, yeah, I can go with that. We can go with that. And I said, okay, I'm just going to pause you. I said, try this now. Say, when I hear that, to me, it sounds encouraging. How do you experience it? What's it like for you? It's like what? And she said, oh, no, for me, it's really straightforward. And so encouraging, every word that you use that is unclean, that comes from your system, it overlays the person that you're talking to. There's less space for them to think of their own ideas. So when I first came across it, there are a whole range of clean questions. Essentially, you can ask about characteristics, the location of things. You can ask for a metaphor because they're really useful to help communicate to other people. Or you can ask for the sequence. But if I just give you an example of the 4 questions I came across when I first learnt it. We get into pairs and I'll ask you, what would you like to have happen? And you just say a sentence. And then I've got 3 more questions I'm allowed to ask. What kind of, where, and is there anything else? These are very simple. And right now, we're just going to have a little exercise so that you can hear them. But I know almost an identical route to this. My colleague Marion Way has been teaching deposition lawyers in the US, the United States, to use these questions in depositions before court. And they said it has transformed their ability to get fresh information from witnesses. So they're simple, but they're powerful. So let me I'll ask you first, and then I'll tell you my story. So, Aga, what's something that you'd really like to have happen?
Thinking about this show, I think that's the first thing that comes to mind since we are recording an interview for the CultureLab. What I would like to have happen for the show is to reach a wider audience, because I truly believe that the conversations that we have and the tools that we share with people are incredibly helpful, and that's the feedback that we get. So reaching a wider audience means making a bigger impact and creating workplaces where people can do the best work of their careers. So this is what I would like to have happen, to reach a wider audience.
So I'm just whispering for your audience that you don't need to listen to this bit. So I'm just going to repeat back some of Aga's words, partly because they help stick in my mind, but also just that she can hear back what it is that she said. Not every word, because I'm not a robot. I can't remember every word. So you'd like to reach a wider audience. And that's because some of, the tools, the things that you share, you've got feedback that they're incredibly helpful. And you want to be able to make a bigger impact so people can be doing the best work of their lives. And when you'd like to reach a wider audience, what kind of wider?
Wider geographically. So I'm really seeing almost like the globe, the planet, and the networks that covers the whole planet, but also wider in the sense of the folks who are listening to this, because I think at the moment we have a lot of people in the space of people and culture. It would be amazing if we could also reach leaders, managers who can use these tools and the approaches to shape a thriving culture in their team. So it's wider geographically, but also wider in terms of demographics and psychographics.
Mm-hmm. That's a demographic and psychographic wider as well, so that you can reach leaders and leaders of teams and business leaders. When you can reach that psychographic, that demographic, where is that reach when you can reach the business leaders?
So that reach, I feel, is really at the heart of the organization, because leaders have such a huge impact on people's experience at work. We know from various surveys that leaders are number one reason why people leave a job, even if they love the work and they like the organization. If you have a crappy leader or a leader simply who doesn't have the right tools, the experience is not going to be great and people's potential is not going to be fully tapped into or unleashed. So the where for me is really the heart of the organization, the beating heart of the organization.
Let me just repeat that back. So what you really want with this show is to reach a wider audience, and that's wider geographically, demographically, and psychographically. And that reach is to the heart of the organization, to the leaders. And is there anything else you'd like this show to reach a wider audience? That's to the heart, the beating heart of a business, and that demographic and geographic reach. Is there anything else about that reach a wider audience?
One more thing that could happen as a result of that is reaching that wider audience would also enable us to reach the right people and culture leaders to join our community. And that's a community of people who are on a mission to make work synonymous with fun, meaning, and belonging. And I know that because a lot of our current members have found their way to our community through the podcast. And I genuinely believe that these folks are the people who shape the future of work. And they are the people who are going to create a new model that is going to make the old model of work obsolete. And so hopefully we're going to have a better future of work. So that's an additional thing, I guess, when I'm thinking about a wider audience and a wider reach.
It's to make that old model of work obsolete and to help people to find their way into that organization, this band of people making work synonymous with fun, meaning, and belonging.
That's right.
It's lovely. So that's just our little conversation. I'm sure your listeners, because they're not involved in it, they can go, oh, okay, what's different? That's not a conversation. I'm not just having a chat with you. I'm deliberately placing my questions in different parts of what you've said to expand the information. Being asked the questions, what's it like?
It feels like you hold a space for me to reflect. And it feels incredibly generous and almost relaxing, I would say, because I think these days we're always in a hurry to convey our message fast because we know that we're going to get interrupted by someone. And so having someone come from a place of genuine curiosity and also demonstrate that they're really, truly listening is quite powerful. So I feel like you are generously holding the space for me to reflect and think about why what I'm trying to do is important for me.
That little point that you've made there is so important. And again, it goes into this whole drama-free conversations is we're so busy trying to prove our point or say our piece, or we're worried that the other person will misunderstand, that it becomes a battleground for attention. Whereas with clean, and you do have to do it for a little while because people will say, oh, I get to the point much faster than you do. And so I have to have I've got a lot of experience now that I can get to a point that's much deeper, richer, and more sustainable by holding space than I do if I try and coerce or motivate or push. So I had to do quite a lot of testing in the early days to make sure, does this way of working with the team, we don't want it to descend into, oh, we all have to sit around and talk about our feelings all the time. Because actually,
Right.
it's not about that. I'm still deliberately putting my questions in a specific part of what you said. I am in control. I am in charge of my half of our conversation, but I'm not trying to influence the data that you come back with. And I think that's what makes something clean. I'm genuinely interested in the richness of your data, and then I can share mine into a rich space.
Yes. Just to reiterate what you have already said about what makes a question or a language clean, truly being at the receiving end of this, there's something really powerful about someone asking questions that don't have any assumptions attached to them. And it's such a huge difference when questions are almost polluted with other people's systems and assumptions, and you can feel it. And then, of course, immediately, instantly, in a moment, especially when it's a conflict situation. Our conversation is not a conflict situation. There was no tension. But sometimes, especially in the workplace, you have these difficult conversations when there is tension, when people are in drama. And so when you feel that someone is coming with their judgment or assumptions and maybe misunderstanding you, it can immediately I'll speak for myself, it would put me in a defensive mode. So I'm really experiencing these questions as questions that reassure me that I will be heard and that I am being heard in a way that I haven't been many times in my life. So yeah, super powerful.
I wanted to just say something, Aga, because there is another side to it. Historically, some women have found it difficult to hold their space in certain workplaces. They can get overlooked. They're not necessarily raised to interrupt, to assume that the floor will belong to them. And one of the side effects of the clean questions for me are almost the opposite of what the two of us just agreed was a good side effect of this. And that is, I do ask very carefully. I do listen. And what it also gives me is a structure. So let me just check. So what you said was this, this, and this. So now I'm going to stop. And, you've asked me a question. Do you want to know what I think? And then when they ask unclean questions, I can stop them and say, let me just check. Do you want to tell me what I should be thinking, or are you genuinely interested in what I think?
Uh-huh.
I also know that learning to ask clean questions and knowing the difference can make you a very fierce, strong member of a conversation, because people cannot shut me up in the way that they maybe did when I was a lot younger, when I was less experienced with language. It makes me quite formidable. And the reason I'm so comfortable in high-end competitive business now is because I can track what's being said. I can hear the unclean questions. I can hear the drama. So I just wanted to say it's not always nice and fluffy, and it's not always friendly. You can use it to hold boundaries as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I hear that and I see that. And I wonder, Caitlin, how can you use it in a team? How can you use it in the very familiar to our listeners, I think, context of conflict, of tension, of drama in the workplace? Do both parties need to be aware of clean language? How can people start experimenting with this in their team?
I generally always say either both parties need to be interested in finding out about one another. I've got a little team I'm working with at the moment. And one of the most, I do clean language interviewing, which is a casual form of clean questions, but it's in an interview. And then I look for the attitudes of the statements that people say about one another. And in one, they're saying, I'm a bit like this. I know I can be a bit like that. I know something's going wrong, but I don't know what it is. And the other person says, categorically, I'm okay. That person is not okay. As I read through their interviews, I go, this is going to be interesting, because this person simply wants an apology, and this person wants to learn about the two of them and to build a better relationship. This person says, I'll only have a good relationship if I get an apology. With those two people, it would be a lot easier if I'd been able to do some training before it got to a crisis. So that's my first thing, is if you're going to do this in a team, it's best to learn it, when you're actually getting on okay, proactively. It's so much nicer to be vitamins instead of, fresh fruit instead of medicine. So ideally, I would do one of two things, or probably one after then the other. If you ask your team, and I can ask you in a moment, when you're working at your best, when you're absolutely working at your best, you're a bit like what? If you find that from everybody, so if somebody says, I'm like a slow snail, I take a long time to do things, but I leave a beautiful glittery trail, and my filing, my evaluation is gorgeous.
So you're looking for metaphors when you ask this question.
Yeah, some people will give you metaphors. Some people don't. Some people might say, "Oh, I know it's still a bit of a metaphor. I'm very like quick fire." You say, "Okay, anything else about the quick fire?" Yep, I like lots of things to come at me at once. Now they are using metaphors, but not an obvious one. Oh, you like lots of things to come at you at once, and when they come at you at once, then what happens? Oh, I bat them away. You think, oh, okay, it's that sort of batting metaphor, but you think, oh, that person who likes lots of things to come at them at once and bat them away, and the other member of the team who's like a slow snail who comes at, they're not necessarily going to like things the same way. So it's a lovely little exercise to do with a team and just get, a top level description. So if I were to ask you, I go, when you're working at your best, you're like what?
The first thing that comes to my mind is when I'm at my best, I am present and in flow. I don't see a metaphor coming at me at the moment. Maybe you can help me with that. But that's what it feels like. I'm really present and focused and in the moment. So it's almost like the past falls back, the future falls back, and everything that matters is here, and I can focus on it and be present to it. And usually when I'm at my best at work, I'm creative.
So I'm really present, not just present, I'm really present. The past falls back, the future falls back, and I'm in flow. And when I'm in flow, like that, I'm really creative. When you're creative, where is that creative? When the past falls back and the future falls back, where is the creative?
Where is the creative?
Mm.
Ah, It's in making connections, I guess, and connecting the dots and finding something surprising and then kind of building it out into something new and surprising and interesting and useful and impactful. Doing it with a lot of joy. That's what comes to me as well. So this whole process is definitely enjoyable. That's where it is, in connecting the dots.
So it's in connecting those dots. So I'm really present. The past falls back, the future falls back, and I'm really present. When I'm really present like that, what happens to those dots when I'm really present?
Ooh, those dots, they lead me to an interesting place, a surprising place that is almost like this temple of creativity where amazing things happen. So suddenly I land in a space where I'm able to come up with something new that is often a hybrid of the things that I've discovered or something completely fresh. So that's what the dots do. They lead me. They almost light the path, I would say.
I think that you're doing fine with your metaphors there, by the way. They light your path. So just supposing we were working together, what could I do that could support you to have the past fall back, the future fall back? What could I do that would really support you to be at your best, to be really present?
What you could do is to point me to some dots, help me connect the dots, invite me for us to explore new connections. And when we discover these new connections, contribute to creating that new thing. I enjoy a lot co-creating with my team members. So that's a very exciting part of the process when we work together, when we get to brainstorm, when we get to find that path together. And sometimes people will point me to the dots that I haven't noticed and show me the connections. It's this light bulb moment where it becomes super fun and very generative as a process. So that's what I enjoy. And that's how you could help me, by pointing me to the dots that maybe I've missed.
Is there anything that I might do, not deliberately, but I might do that would stop you being present? Any kinds of things or behaviors I might engage in where you're like, oh, this will stop the dots from leading me?
If you hurry, if you try to do this fast, because I think this process requires wandering around and being adventurous and kind of taking really broad approach first before you converge. And so I think what would stop me from this process was, okay, so like, let's decide now, what are we going to do? How are we going to do it? That would be an issue.
Great. So this is what a team could do. So one of them is to have a generative round of when you're at your best, you're like what, you're a bit like what, a few clean questions. I tried to keep it almost to the ones that we did before. And then how could I support you? What could I do to support you? What might I do that would spoil it? What we're looking for is what's the smallest little adjustments we need to make in relation to each other. Because if I'm doing too much adjusting for you, I won't be at my best.
Yes.
It's like, I want you to be at your best, but I want to be at my best too.
I just want to put a pin in this and unpack it a little bit. So if we were doing this exercise in a team, I imagine that after we stop talking about me, I would ask you the same question, right? What does it look like when you are at your best? What could I do to stop you from being at your best?
Yes. We might have, let's say there's 7 of us in our team. We might have 7 different little models.
Right.
And then we might say, okay, let's look at Jerry. Now that we've looked at Jerry and Aga, you know yours, Caitlin, you know yours. How might you have to adjust the way you work to support Jerry? Jerry, how might you need to adjust the way you work? Any insights we're having? So in some ways we would broaden it out then. And we'd be like, oh, hang on a minute. Maybe what we should really do is when we're going to start a new project, we should actually have some broadening out time. So Aga can really get that creativity up and running because she's our creativity star. We might specifically build in some work rituals that allow us to absolutely be at our best. For me, when I'm at my best, it's like I'm in a mosh pit, like at a heavy metal concert.
Right.
With lots of things coming at me at once. But you'll also find if I can't move my body, I cannot work at my best. I need to be able to use all of my senses. And so we could easily decide, okay, well, and if you want Caitlin to be at her best, let's go for a walk. And we might find out, oh, Aga, can we do the broadening out stuff on the move? These are very small things that a team can forget to do, to get off their desks, to get away from the computer and just go for a walk together or have some dreaming time before they decide to make plans.
This is such a beautiful illustration of those little things that you can do that have a huge impact, not just when it comes to people working well together, but building that foundation that needs to be there for people to work well together, which is fostering a sense of belonging. Because honestly, I cannot think of anything more powerful than people genuinely being curious how they can flex so that they can help me be at my best. And wanting to know also, when am I at my best? What do I need to be at my best at work? This is really beautiful. And I don't know if you've seen in your work, whether you are aware of any research, whether indeed it has an impact on people's perceived sense of belonging to the team.
Oh, yes. It's funny because it not only in a business term does it increase a sense of belonging, and don't get me wrong, and it says it in my contracts, I say with people, I say, you might lose somebody. Because the other thing that happens is the group can get together and they can go, actually, we don't want to work the way that you want to work. We don't fit together. People leave.
Right.
Not usually in an acrimonious way, but just, this is not the right team for me. I shouldn't be in this team. I'm a sunflower and, you all want to be a lawn. I want to be the big me and you all want to work at the same level. Not a good fit. So there's that. I'm just working at the moment with the Applied Neuroscience Association. And we're looking into what the evidence, they're called ANA, but what's the neurological evidence that this kind of attention really supports people to then function well. We haven't looked at it yet, so I can see it in our results. We track results. I can see it with the teenagers. We broke all of the rules of getting these kids back into school because they created self-organizing systems. But the other thing that can happen is it can be a very psychologically safe environment for people who don't always feel like they fit in a group. For people who are neurodiverse, it doesn't label people, but it says if this is what you need to work at your best, then obviously we're going to want to do something to support you. It doesn't allow us to say, somebody like me, you need to move all the time. How irritating. I wish you wouldn't fiddle. We just say, okay, Caitlin is likely to be working best on her feet. I have a colleague where me moving around, it really distracts her. And so when we're working together, I take my shoes off so there's no noise and I turn my camera off. It's a little thing, but now I'm happy and she's happy.
So you're not in your optimal environment right now, Caitlin, because I told you explicitly not to move too much because of the mic, so that we don't.
You did, but I can cope for a short period of time.
Good, but it's good to know. And it's so incredible. How useful is that? And how simple for teams to do an exercise like that. Another thing that we did as part of our workshop, so you asked us to talk a little bit about what are we like at our best, but then, and it was also a very interesting conversation, there was this question about what are you like when you are in drama? And I have to say, you asked me and Anish, one of my team members, this question during a call, and it was so eye-opening. And so I'm sure that it would be incredibly eye-opening for a lot of our listeners as well. Can you walk us through this briefly? Why is it useful to be asking this, and what can people learn from having this conversation?
Particularly, in the coaching and the development world, I think there's a bit of an addiction to outcome thinking and positivity. Whereas I think a good old bit of drama, it's juicy. Things that replicate over and over again, they have to have a nice, strong pattern underneath them. Otherwise, you wouldn't be doing the same thing. They're beautiful. They've got really strong internal structure. So all the way through this work, I've been as much of a fan of a good problem as I am of a good outcome. But the way you deal with it has to be the same. If you approach a problem with oh, yeah, it is a bit like that. Oh, I hate that too. Or, oh, that's awful. Can't believe she said that. If you join the drama, then you are not spending exquisite attention with it. You are collaborating, colluding. But if you ask the questions with genuine respect and curiosity, so when I asked you, were you okay to share? When you're in drama, when you're not working at your best, when you're almost at your worst, you're like what? What are you like, Aga?
Yeah, so we've already had this conversation, so I'm super prepared to answer this question, actually. When I realize what I'm like, I get really nervous and snappy. And an image that came to my mind is this little chihuahua that barks and is quite snappy, predominantly because it's afraid, probably. So it might make a lot of noise, probably not too much damage, but it's just, yeah, super nervous. And the reason predominantly is because I'm afraid that things might fall apart.
Anyone who's just listening to this, you can now hear the insights that you had, because when we very first had the conversation, you just said, I get really snappy. And because your colleague was also on the call, you said something like, oh, you've seen me like this. I get really snappy. And so with the clean questions, what you're doing is you accept and extend the bit that they already know about. So I say, what kind of snappy? And you say, oh, I might be short or frustrated with this person or this person. And then I say, is there anything else when you're snappy like that? And you say, well, it's like a little dog. You're making a lot of noise and biting, but not doing too much damage. And so as we expand those metaphors with the clean questions, and I know you had a metaphor your colleague didn't. I think they said that they
explained a lot and find excuses or reasons. Mm-hmm.
But so theirs was not metaphorical, but we won't talk about them because they're not here. But with yours, as we ask those questions, you get the insight. You're like, oh, my dog's not snapping because it's angry. My dog's snapping because it's afraid. And it thinks that it needs to sort everything out, but it's just a little dog. And then you hear the joy of the fact that it was a little dog. That would be a completely different experience if that was a bulldog or an Alsatian, a German Shepherd. Each of the little words that people use when they say what they're like at their worst are very interesting, and they tell us about our invisible architecture. And also they make us, I was going to use a very unprofessional word, but for me,
Please use it. I love unprofessional words.
They make us love our darkest, deepest, dirtiest, wettest bits. They help us to get our shameful stuff out and just bless it with a nice bit of tension and go, oh, because behind drama, you are always going into drama for something important. When your colleague is making excuses and over-explaining, they're trying to achieve something that's important to their system. They might not be doing a very good job of it. The Chihuahua might not be doing a very good job of taking care of everything, but they're trying. One of the reasons that I ask a team, don't just model when you're at your best, you're like what? Model when you're at your worst, because that's when you're going to want the tools. And then you and I could have the same conversation that we had earlier. In fact, I can ask it now. I can say, so when you're a little Chihuahua and you're barking and you're biting, but you're snappy, you're not doing too much damage, what could I do to support that Chihuahua? What could I do that would really support you?
I think you could remind me, and that would require a certain level of intimacy that we actually do have within our team, that I'm actually not a Chihuahua. And I'm a stronger, bigger dog, probably, that is actually capable of facing the situation in a more constructive way. So I don't need to be afraid.
What kind of stronger, bigger dog are you really?
I am the kind of dog, San Bernard, I guess, that is really capable of saving people from under the snow. I think that's the dog that I am, and that I sometimes forget that I have it in me, that I'm not just a Chihuahua.
When you are being snappy, and I know you're really a St. Bernard. I mean, you find people under the snow and you save them. You're a big dog. What could I do or say that would really support you when you're snappy? What could I do that would help remind you that you're a St. Bernard?
I don't know, maybe crack a joke and say something about what do St. Bernardines have around their necks? Like, I think they have
we say they've got brandy.
Brandy, yeah. So maybe just asking me, where is your brandy or something so that I remember who I am actually, and that I don't need to freak out about small things because I've been through more difficult situations and so I can cope. So just having this code language and helping me snap out of it, because that's basically usually what happens. I just need to get present. And when I get present and when I realize where I am and who I am, it's so much easier for me to feel grounded and show up in a way that I can be proud of,
And is there anything that I could do that would make it worse? So when you're snappy, and let's just say I'm not at my best and I wasn't capable to say, hey, where's your brandy? Is there anything I might do that would make it worse?
Yeah, I think probably one of the things that is one of my triggers is if you keep repeating, it's not my fault, I didn't do anything wrong, because that's not what's stressing me out. I'm not trying to find someone to blame. I'm just trying to make sure that things don't fall apart or, people don't die under snow or whatever.
If I misunderstood the reasoning behind the chihuahua and I started to defend myself and say, hey, it wasn't my fault, I didn't do it, stop snapping at me, then I'm not actually in rapport with what the chihuahua's trying to do, which is just trying to stop things falling apart. Great. What we're doing here is a little bit of a bigger process that I call metaphors at work. It doesn't take a lot of time. I've got a new consultancy unit at the moment, so they're just 7 people. And I'd say altogether, we're going to have 6 90-minute sessions over 6 months. And I think that that's all a team needs to do, when you're working at your best, when you're working at best, when you're all working at your best. Great, stop. When you're in drama, when you're in drama, when you're in drama, when you're in drama, stop. And then after each session, the team then goes, what's 1 or 2 small things that we're going to do now to adjust this team, our rituals, our way of working, to take on board the new information? We'll do really useful feedback for you is like what? And then you can get a feedback model, making really good decisions for you.
Mm-hmm.
When you're making decisions well, when you're making decisions at your worst. These exercises are usually best done in groups of about 6. So if you have a big team, like if there's 36 of you, break into 5 or 6 groups. If it's too big, if there's more than 10 of you, it's hard to remember everybody. So I think 3 minimum, 9 maximum, because it's hard to remember more than that.
Yes.
My little recommendations. If you want to go and try this with your team, that would be my recommendation.
That really sounds amazing. And it's such a versatile model as well, because you can basically ask people any sort of questions. Like, we are focusing a lot on helping companies cultivate a culture where people have a sense of fun, meaning, and belonging. And I can immediately think of having a series of conversations where people are being asked, what needs to happen for you to have a sense of fun at work, meaning and belonging, and so on. Mm-hmm.
Fun for you, even just fun, generally the term fun for you is like what?
Yeah.
Get a little tiny round of that and then build on it and then say, when you're having fun at work is like what? A little round. You can build these up really nicely, but so that we're not just working with what we already know, but the clean questions help reveal fresh information to us.
Yeah, because that's what they're designed to do, right? Give us new information beyond what we already know. I love it. And I wish that we could speak for so much longer, because I have so many questions still. Maybe we need to bring you back on the show, but I want to be respectful of your time. So let's shift gears. And we have this section in the show that is called rapid fire questions. The rules of the rapid fire questions are that I will ask you 5 questions in rapid succession, and you will answer them in under 2 minutes. So it goes super fast. All right, let's do it. As I mentioned already, at CultureBrained, we are on a mission to make work synonymous with fun, meaning, and belonging. And so my question to you, Caitlin, is what would be your number 1 tip to bring more fun to the workplace?
It would be just what you've just said. It would be ask people, fun for you is like what? Get those models, draw them, paint them, dance them, and then be really rigorous. Get that into your everyday. Get it into your everyday day.
And what is the sign, or perhaps signs in plural, that a company culture needs some work, or perhaps even a major overhaul?
People bitching about behind each other's back, people telling you that someone else needs feedback and not giving it. It's that simple. Broken communication.
Do you admire any companies for the culture? And if yes, why?
Ooh. Yeah, I've got to say, this company Visual Meaning that I've just been working with, I look at what they're creating. It's a devolved governance company. It's hard, but they are rigorous. They are determined that people can be trusted. So yeah, there's a lot that I've seen, but this one at the moment I'm working with, Visual Meaning, love it. Love what they're doing.
Awesome. What books on culture, on leadership, philosophy, psychology, anything really, what are the books, or perhaps even just one book that you would recommend to our listeners?
The first one I read was Edward T. Hall, The Dance of Time, How Different Cultures Structure Time. I think you can get everything. Well, I felt like I got everything from that book. And then another one is Metaphors We Live By Lakoff and Johnson. Really familiarize yourselves with the invisible architecture of other people and other cultures.
Love that. Love the phrase invisible architecture. Okay, so final question. What is one thing that our listeners can do literally tomorrow to build their own culture lab and start cultivating a culture that will help them and their teams to bring their vision to life?
One thing is bring one clean question for the day. What kind of? Add it to everything. Is there anything else about? Add it to everything. One clean question a day keeps your assumptions at bay. You will learn more.
I love that. Oh my gosh, I enjoyed this conversation so much, Caitlin. Thank you so much. It's been delightful, and I'm always learning so much from you. I appreciate your work. It's so important. I know that you are helping so many organizations. So if people want to learn more about you, about your work, we haven't mentioned your book yet, by the way. So definitely would recommend that our listeners check out your book and read it. But what are other places, preferably online, because we have a global audience, where they could go and learn more?
So you can find me on LinkedIn. And if you link in with me, we have a whole clean resource, which is free. It's an online resource. We call it the Clean Campus, almost like a clean university. I'll give you the link, which you can put at the end of this podcast. It's free to join every Tuesday and Saturday at different time periods. You can go and practice with somebody. You can go and take an idea that you've got for your team. You can post a question. You can find a little group and post a question and say, I want to bring this into my team. What ideas do you have? People will help. And it's a drama-free group. So even if somebody posts something a bit contemptuous or drama-y, other people will ask them questions to help settle it again. So it's a really nice community.
Amazing. I want to try it out myself. Thank you. And we'll post the link in the show notes.
Lovely.
So once more, thank you so much for this conversation. I enjoyed it tremendously. Looking forward to having you back on the show and maybe doing a deeper dive into some of the tools, metaphor and clean language and other tools that you use with companies.
Fantastic. Every time we speak, I think there's so much resonance between the values of CultureLab and the work that we do. I love it.
There is, isn't there? Yeah. Thank you. I'm Aga Bayer, the creator and host of the CultureLab podcast. And this is the CultureLab team.
Anis Enlabarawi, production manager.
Sound producer, Heather McPherson, Twisted Spur Media.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the CultureLab podcast. Caitlin and I hope that you got inspired by what we talked about and that you'll use some of these ideas to experiment with your team. Caitlin also ran a workshop for the CultureBrained community and was really amazing. Oh my gosh, I took away so much from it. So if you are a member already and missed the workshop, you can find the recording on our private platform. If you are not a member yet, CultureBrained is one-of-a-kind global community for culture leaders who look for new ways of cultivating remarkable cultures in this brave new world of remote and hybrid work. If you are in charge of a culture-shaping project, and if you believe that work should be synonymous with fun, meaning, and belonging, I think you'd feel right at home in our community. You can learn more about CultureBrained at tinyurl.com/CultureBrained. There's a link in the show notes, so you don't need to write it down. And now, a quick preview of the upcoming episode. This time, my guest is going to be Dan Strode, one of the members of the CultureBrained community, the author of a recently published book called The Culture Advantage, and Global Group Director of Culture and Strategy at Banco Santander. Have a listen.
So for me, culture is the way we do things around here when no one is looking. And that's very important, the second part, the no one is looking part, because I think you cannot game a culture, you cannot have a culture because you think it's something nice to have and looks good on your wall, but rather you have to do it because you believe in it. So when you change the way you act because you believe in it, and there's no advantage to be gained there, and no one's looking and measuring you on that, you have a true culture. And that really is the advantage that you can have within your business.
Thanks for tuning in and listening to this episode of the CultureLab podcast. If you found any moments that were interesting, inspiring, or maybe even game-changing, please share this episode with someone who'd appreciate it. After all, good ideas are meant to be shared. If you haven't subscribed to the CultureLab yet, you can do it on any podcast streaming platform of your choice. If you want to receive our weekly insights on cultivating a remarkable, powerful, and authentic company culture, especially in a business that scales, type this into your browser. tinyurl.com/agabayer. That's tinyurl.com/AGABAJER. Also, we would be ever so grateful if you could rate and review our podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to it. And finally, the entire CultureLab team and our guests, we are going to continue exploring how we can make the word work synonymous with fun, meaning, and belonging, and how we can build remarkable cultures that scale as our businesses grow and the world keeps on changing. So, what do you want to hear about next? What matters to you? Email us at lindsay@agabayer.com and let us know.